What if the perfect murder wasn't the one with blood splattered across the walls or a frantic struggle? What if it was the one so meticulously planned that when the police arrived, they found nothing but silence and order? The kind of death that looks less like a crime and more like a tragic accident. It sounds impossible, but this is exactly where our story begins. In a quiet suburban home that appeared untouched by violence, it was just past midnight when the call came in. A woman was found lifeless in her bedroom, her body still and peaceful. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no displaced furniture. The house was immaculate, almost sterile. Officers arrived expecting chaos, but instead stepped into a scene that felt staged. Too clean, too perfect. The only person present was her husband, calm and composed, sitting quietly in the living room. His demeanor was unsettling in its precision. No panic, no tears, just a man who seemed to have rehearsed every word and every gesture. Detectives began their work. The timeline was tight, precise. The husband claimed he was out for a run at the time she died, a detail corroborated by a neighbor who saw him leave around 9:15 p.m. The victim's last known activity was checking her phone just before 9 p.m., sending a text that would later become a crucial piece of the puzzle. No calls, no strange visitors, no signs of struggle. The medical examiner's initial report suggested natural causes, a heart attack perhaps, but something didn't sit right with the lead investigator. Officers scoured the home for anything out of place. Every drawer, every room, every surface was scrutinized. Not a single fingerprint outside of the usual. The husband's alibi checked out. Security cameras showed no one entering or leaving the property during the critical window. It was, in every conventional sense, the perfect crime scene. No forced entry, no evidence of a fight, no immediate motive visible. The husband's story was airtight, his calm convincing. Yet, as the team pieced together the timeline and cross-referenced statements, one tiny, seemingly insignificant detail began to stand out. Something so minor it would be easy to dismiss, overlooked by everyone except the most meticulous investigator. This tiny piece of evidence quietly contradicted the husband's entire account, forcing the detectives to question everything they believed about this accident. What was this overlooked detail? How could one small mistake unravel a plan so flawlessly executed? The answer lies not in what was present, but what was missing. And when that missing piece finally comes to light, it shatters the illusion of the perfect murder. As the investigation deepened, the detectives found themselves tangled in a web far more complex than they initially imagined. Every statement, every alibi, began to unravel under the weight of that single inconsistency. It wasn't just a crack in the story. It was a fissure that threatened to bring the whole case crashing down. But what made this tiny detail so powerful wasn't obvious at first. It was subtle, almost invisible, like a whisper lost among louder truths. Staying with the story means watching that whisper grow louder, revealing a truth no one expected. It's in the quiet moments, the overlooked clues, where the real twists lie. And it's those small, almost insignificant slips that turn a seemingly flawless plan into a tangled mess of doubt and suspicion. There's a particular moment coming up, one that flips the entire narrative on its head, proving once again that even the best-laid schemes can fail because of something as simple as what's missing. If you're drawn to stories where careful strategies fall apart over a tiny, critical error, you might find yourself right at home here. There's something compelling about watching perfection crack, not from grand betrayals, but from the smallest, often unnoticed details. So, if you enjoy unraveling cases where the devil really is in the details, stick around, you won't want to miss how this one ends. In the weeks leading up to the night, he approached the plan with a precision that bordered on obsession. Every detail was logged, every potential variable considered. He began by mapping out her daily routines with quiet diligence. When she left for work, her usual stops, even her preferred coffee shop order. He took note of the neighbors' comings and goings, the mail carrier's schedule, and the times when the street was quietest. These observations formed the backbone of his timeline, a scaffold upon which the entire plan depended. He knew the importance of controlling time, not just in the act itself, but in the moments before and after. He devised an alibi that could withstand scrutiny, planting it carefully in the days prior. He arranged meetings with colleagues, ensuring his presence would be recorded at a local cafe during the critical window. To avoid suspicion, he even rehearsed casual greetings and small talk, recognizing that genuine interaction couldn't be faked at the moment of questioning. His phone usage was meticulously planned. Calls were timed to the minute, messages sent in a natural rhythm. He placed his phone in a spot where GPS tracking would confirm his location, but far enough to avoid any accidental digital trace linking him to the scene later. It was a subtle balance. Too much phone activity could raise eyebrows, too little would look suspicious. Controlling access to the house was another key element. He made sure to enter and leave through the back door during times when neighbors were least likely to notice. He even wiped down the door handle with a mild cleaner that left no residue, a simple but effective choice to erase fingerprints without raising red flags. Inside, he staged everything to suggest normalcy. The coffee cup she used that morning was left on the counter, half full as if she'd just stepped away. The television was on a low volume, tuned to a channel she favored. These small touches were meant to paint a picture of everyday life, frozen in time. He anticipated the police's first steps. Knowing they would seek signs of forced entry, he ensured all windows and doors locked properly, and staged the front door to appear undisturbed. He even placed a small potted plant on the porch in a way that would suggest recent watering, a minor detail that implied ongoing care and a lack of hurried activity. He cleaned the bathroom counters and kitchen surfaces meticulously, removing any stray hairs or skin cells that could later betray him. He avoided using harsh chemicals that might arouse suspicion, opting instead for common household cleaners that would seem routine. The timing was critical. He studied the neighborhood's noise patterns to choose a moment when ambient sounds would mask any unusual activity. He scoped out the local traffic cameras, confirming blind spots where his car could be parked unnoticed. He also considered the neighbors' habits, knowing when they typically left for work or returned home to minimize the risk of being seen. His movements were choreographed like a dance, each step measured, rehearsed, and timed perfectly. Yet, despite all this careful preparation, he understood that perfection required one crucial assumption: that every element would behave exactly as expected, that no unforeseen variables would emerge to unravel the delicate balance. This assumption, while necessary, was also his greatest vulnerability, because in the world of seemingly perfect crimes, it is often the smallest oversight, something too minute to anticipate, that can bring everything crashing down. As the night approached, he made final adjustments, rechecking his alibi, verifying his phone's location settings, and reviewing the timeline once again. The stage was set. The pieces were in place. Outside, the neighborhood settled into its usual quiet, unaware that behind closed doors, a plan designed to seem flawless was about to be tested under the harshest light. Around 9:15 p.m., the house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The living room lights were dimmed to a soft amber glow, casting long shadows but revealing enough to suggest normalcy. He moved deliberately, closing the front door with a gentle click, making sure it latched properly. The lock engaged smoothly, no signs of forced entry. He glanced briefly at the hallway clock, then made his way to the study, where a single desk lamp was left on, illuminating scattered papers meant to look like work left unfinished. By 9:30 p.m., he was in the kitchen, methodically wiping down the countertops. The kitchen window was shut tight, curtains drawn. No outside noises penetrated the thick glass. A cup of coffee sat half full on the counter, steam long since faded but the cup positioned as if recently abandoned. He checked his phone again, tapping it lightly to confirm location settings were still active, and then placed it on the kitchen island, face down, nestled between a set of keys and a small notepad with a hurriedly scribbled reminder. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, a scent chosen to mask any unexpected odors. At 9:45 p.m., he moved to the bedroom. The door was closed but not locked, the light from the bedside lamp casting a warm circle on the carpet. The bed was neatly made, pillows fluffed just so, and a book lay open face down at the foot. He adjusted the blanket with careful precision, then lingered over a framed photograph on the nightstand, momentarily fixing its angle to appear natural. The window was slightly cracked open, a barely audible breeze causing the thin curtains to flutter softly, a subtle touch to suggest the night's air had been welcomed in. By 10 p.m., he had returned to the living room, settling into the armchair by the fireplace. The fire was unlit, but the mantel clock ticked steadily, adding a quiet rhythm to the stillness. He reached for the remote, clicking on the television to a muted news channel. The screen flickered with headlines about local events, nothing unusual, but the glow added an ambient light that softened the sharpness of the shadows. He sipped from a glass of water resting on the side table, careful not to disturb the neat arrangement of coasters and magazines. At approximately 10:15 p.m., he walked deliberately to the front door, peering out the peephole as if checking for any unusual activity in the quiet street. Satisfied, he locked the door once more, then engaged the alarm system. The familiar beep sounded, confirming the house was secured. The hallway light above him buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow over the polished wooden floor. He paused, seemingly reflecting, before moving toward the kitchen to retrieve a pair of gloves from a drawer. Black, thin, and clean. By 10:30 p.m., the scene he intended for discovery was almost complete. The dining room table was set for two, plates turned face down, silverware arranged precisely. A single candle, unlit, stood at the center. The room was immaculate, no signs of struggle, no misplaced objects. He double-checked the locks on every door and window, confirming they held firm. Yet, on the hallway wall, a small smudge, barely noticeable, marred the otherwise spotless surface. It was the kind of detail that might escape the casual observer, but it lingered oddly in the periphery. At 10:45 p.m., he returned to the living room, this time speaking quietly into his phone. His voice was calm, measured, recounting events as if rehearsing the story he planned to tell the authorities. The phone call ended abruptly, and he placed the device back on the table, the screen glowing faintly in the dim room. The house seemed to hold its breath, every sound muted but for the rhythmic ticking of the mantel clock and the distant, steady hum of the air conditioning unit. Just before 11 p.m., the unexpected happened. A sharp knock echoed from the front door, startling in the silence. He moved quickly, opening the door to reveal a neighbor's concerned face. The conversation was brief, polite, but the expression lingering in the neighbor's eyes suggested unease. Closing the door, he returned to the hallway, where the light flickered momentarily, a subtle, almost imperceptible disruption that seemed out of place in such a controlled environment. Minutes later, the phone rang. He answered swiftly, his voice steady as he spoke to the dispatcher. The 911 call, calm yet urgent, narrated a version of events carefully constructed to divert suspicion and frame the night in a way investigators would initially accept. But as the words hung in the air, the faintest discord in the background, a barely audible creak or a misplaced object, hinted that beneath the surface, something was amiss. The story was set, but the truth was waiting, just beyond the veil of control. The call began with an almost clinical precision. The husband's voice was steady, lacking the tremor or gasps one might expect in such a moment. He reported finding his wife unresponsive in their bedroom, specifying the time as around 10:15 p.m., a detail that struck the dispatcher as unusually exact. When asked if she was breathing or conscious, he responded calmly, confirming neither, but without panic. He described the scene as normal otherwise, adding that he hadn't touched anything and had called immediately. The dispatcher's questions followed a familiar, methodical pattern. Had there been any signs of forced entry, any recent arguments, any known medical conditions? Each answer came promptly, sometimes too quickly, as if rehearsed. He mentioned no signs of struggle, no disturbances, and confirmed the front door was locked when he arrived home. The husband's tone remained controlled throughout, with no hesitation or emotional inflection that might signal distress or shock. Minutes later, the first responders arrived. 2 officers entered first, their footsteps soft on the hardwood floor, followed by paramedics who quickly moved to assess the woman's condition. The room was dimly lit by a single bedside lamp casting long shadows, the curtains drawn tight against the night outside. Temperature was cool but not cold. An ambient stillness settled over the space. The bed itself was neatly made, the sheets pulled taut as if untouched since the day began. A glass of water sat on the nightstand, half full, positioned precisely at the edge. Officers took in the layout swiftly. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no jimmied windows. The husband had indeed locked the front door, matching his report. The furniture was arranged methodically, personal items placed with care. A small framed photograph of the couple rested on the dresser, face up and free of dust, as if recently handled. On the floor near the bed, a pair of slippers lay side by side, perfectly aligned rather than casually kicked off. One paramedic paused at the doorway, eyeing the scene with a practiced gaze. Something didn't sit right. The room was too orderly, too undisturbed for what should have been a chaotic moment. The glass of water, for instance, half full, but no condensation on the outside, suggesting it hadn't been recently poured. The slippers aligned rather than scattered. Even the faint scent of lavender in the air, consistent with the husband's claim that his wife liked essential oils, seemed almost deliberately placed. The paramedic exchanged a glance with an officer but said nothing. The inconsistency was small, a fleeting impression rather than concrete evidence, but it planted a seed of doubt. The husband's calm demeanor, the meticulous scene, the absence of any clear disturbance. It was all too precise, too controlled. As detectives arrived, their expressions tightened. They moved through the room with a quiet intensity, their eyes scanning every detail, cataloging evidence beyond the obvious. One detective knelt by the bedside, fingers hovering just above the sheets, noting their pristine state. Another examined the locked door again, then glanced at the husband, who stood nearby with the same composed expression. The lead detective spoke softly to the team, words carrying a weight that unsettled the room. A murmur that this scene felt too perfect. It was a phrase loaded with meaning, a subtle alarm that beneath the surface order lay something deliberately constructed. The investigation was shifting, the initial narrative unraveling in the face of these quiet contradictions. Outside, the night held its breath as the first threads of doubt began to weave through what had seemed an open and shut case. They stepped inside again, the low hum of their flashlights cutting through the staged stillness. The air was untouched, sterile almost, like a museum exhibit rather than a lived-in home. The lead detective's eyes scanned slowly, methodically, as if reading a language of absence written in dust-free surfaces and unnaturally aligned objects. No one spoke. The team moved as one, their practice steps light but deliberate. The detective's gaze lingered on the living room first. The couch cushions were perfectly fluffed, the throw blanket folded with surgical precision. There were no stray crumbs, no coffee rings on the table, no sign of the usual human chaos. The TV remote sat face up, aligned perfectly parallel to the edge of the coffee table. It felt rehearsed, like a stage set waiting for actors who had already exited. In the kitchen, the sink was spotless, not a single dish out of place or hint of water droplets. The trash bin was nearly empty, the kind of emptiness that raised questions rather than answers. The smell of a meal recently cooked was absent. No lingering aroma of coffee or burnt toast. The refrigerator door was closed, its magnets arranged in a neat cluster, as if someone had taken care to create a scene of domestic normalcy rather than live in it. The detective's fingers hovered near the light switches, flipping them on and off, noting the precise, uniform brightness. Windows were locked, curtains drawn with mathematical evenness. Outside noises were muffled, the usual neighborhood sounds strangely absent. The quiet wasn't comforting, it was oppressive. As they moved to the bedroom, the detective's attention was drawn to the bed. The sheets were tucked in tightly, no wrinkles, no sign of sleep. The pillows were stacked in an almost ceremonial arrangement. A single book lay open on the nightstand, the page carefully folded at a perfect angle, as if frozen mid-read. The detective crouched, eyes narrowing at the bedside lamp's cord, which was wound neatly behind the table leg, an odd detail in a room supposedly in the midst of chaos. Nothing felt spontaneous here, No evidence of hurried footsteps or panicked movements. No trace of a struggle or even a misplaced personal item. The scene was a silent, polished tableau, lacking the usual fingerprints of everyday life's unpredictability. The detective's gaze shifted to the hallway, where a family photo hung straight and unblemished, the glass gleaming without a speck of dust. The date on the calendar was current, but the pages beneath it were crisp and untouched, as if someone had turned them with care just before the event. Stopping at the stairwell, the detective's eyes caught a faint smudge on the banister. Too deliberate to be an accident, too subtle to be noticed at first glance. Their mind raced, considering how such a minor detail could unravel the fabric of this staged perfection. The quiet dread settled heavier now. The team's earlier unease was crystallizing into something more tangible. The detective's flashlight swept the room again, settling briefly on the clock above the mantelpiece. Its hands were frozen just past midnight, a time that didn't align with witness statements or phone records. A subtle inconsistency, almost imperceptible, but glaring in its implication. The detective reached out slowly, fingers brushing the clock's face, heart quickening. This was the thread they had to pull. As the forensic specialist stepped closer, the detective's voice was barely a whisper. This isn't just a scene. It's a story someone wanted us to read. And maybe, just maybe, it's a story with a missing page. The room seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the night deepened, shadows pooling in the corners, waiting. Something small, easily overlooked, was about to crack this too-perfect facade wide open. Before we dive deeper into what unfolded next, if you've been following this case closely, take a moment to hit subscribe or leave a comment. Sometimes those small details we miss in conversation turn out to be the key pieces in a puzzle like this. Your thoughts might just spark the next breakthrough. Back inside the dimly lit room, the forensic specialist lingered near the edge of the crime scene, eyes scanning over every detail with painstaking care. It was then that something peculiar caught his attention. Not a glaring clue, not a piece of evidence screaming for notice, but a tiny inconsistency that anyone else might have passed right over. On the edge of the coffee table sat a half-empty cup of tea, steam long gone. But what stood out wasn't the cup itself. It was the faint lipstick mark on the rim. The detective furrowed his brow. According to the husband's statement, his wife hadn't brewed tea that evening. She supposedly preferred coffee after 7 p.m., and he had claimed to have been the one to make the last pot. Yet here was this cup, clearly used, with a lipstick trace that didn't match the wife's usual shade but rather a subtle, older brand she hadn't worn in years. Odd, but not impossible. People sometimes change their habits or make up brands. But the real crux was the placement of the cup relative to the rest of the scene, specifically where the husband said he had been sitting during the time in question. He described himself seated near the window, holding a book, away from the kitchen area where the tea was prepared. Yet the cup was positioned on the coffee table directly in front of the sofa, a spot the wife usually claimed as hers. If the husband truly hadn't touched the tea that night, how did it end up there, half-sipped and abandoned? This small detail, just a cup and a lipstick mark, began to unravel the tightly stitched timeline. It wasn't about the cup itself or even the lipstick. It was about the contradiction in the husband's story and the physical evidence left behind by an ordinary drink. The detectives knew this wasn't a smoking gun, but it was enough to warrant a second look at everything they'd taken for granted. The team gathered quietly, sharing quick glances before the lead detective spoke, voice low but steady. "We need to recheck the timeline. Every movement, every claim he made about where he was and what he was doing needs to be cross-referenced against this." The forensic specialist nodded, adding, "Sometimes, the smallest inconsistency can reveal the biggest lies." They pulled the husband's statements back into focus, comparing them with phone records, timestamps from the home security system, and even the smart meter's logs for energy usage around the kitchen appliances. The more they looked, the more the husband's version of events seemed less like a factual account and more like a carefully crafted story with gaps emerging under scrutiny. As the pieces began to shift, the detective's expression hardened. Something was definitely off, and once they aligned this tiny detail with cold, hard data, the husband's narrative started to collapse in ways none of them had anticipated. The question wasn't just what had happened that night. It was how had someone so close to the truth missed this crucial piece for so long? The room grew heavy with silent anticipation as they prepared to dig deeper. The next step promised answers but also raised stakes. What had seemed like a small, almost irrelevant detail was about to change everything. Detectives pulled out the husband's phone records first. A routine step but a necessary one. No need for hacking, just a formal request to the carrier for call logs and location pings within the critical time frame. The husband had claimed he was at a diner downtown from 7:30 to 9 p.m., grilling the waitress and catching up with an old friend. The phone showed outgoing and incoming calls during that period, but the timestamps didn't fully line up with his story. The first call was to his wife's number at 7:45 p.m., lasting barely 30 seconds. According to the husband, he was already seated at the diner then, chatting with the waitress, but the brief call suggested something else. Perhaps a quick check-in or an attempt to divert suspicion. The detectives noted that the location data tied his phone to a point about 2 miles away from the diner at that exact moment, near a gas station known for its security cameras. The husband's timeline was already wobbling. They moved on to confirm his location at the diner itself. The detectives contacted the restaurant manager, who checked the reservation book and staff schedules. The husband's name wasn't listed, and the waitress he mentioned didn't recall serving anyone fitting his description that night. There was no record of a party at the time he claimed to be there. It was subtle but significant. If he wasn't at the diner, where was he? Next, the team requested footage from the gas station's surveillance cameras. The staff cooperated quickly. The cameras were standard but functional, capturing the forecourt and the store entrance. At 7:43 p.m., the cameras caught a man matching the husband's description purchasing a soda. The timestamp was clear, 2 minutes before his phone called his wife from the same area. This placed him away from the diner during the window he claimed to have been there. The detectives then tracked down the friend the husband said he'd met at the diner. The friend was reluctant but agreed to speak. He remembered the husband calling to cancel their meetup last minute, citing a sudden work emergency. No mention of dinner plans, no surprise meeting. This contradicted the husband's version of the evening yet again. Looking for more evidence, the team reviewed the husband's credit card statements. There was a charge at 8:05 p.m. from a convenience store about 5 blocks from the gas station, a location that fit the timeline of the surveillance footage. The husband had said he was at the diner, but here was proof he'd been somewhere else entirely. The receipt matched the card swipe, making it difficult to argue. The detectives also checked the husband's usual routine by interviewing neighbors and co-workers. Neighbors recalled seeing him leave the house later than he claimed, around 7:40 p.m., dressed casually instead of the business casual he insisted he had worn to the diner. Co-workers confirmed he had been reachable by phone, but none had seen or spoken to him in person that evening. Piece by piece, the husband's alibi was unraveling. Each seemingly minor inconsistency became a thread pulling the whole story apart. The final blow came when detectives reviewed footage from a nearby apartment complex's doorbell camera. At exactly 8:10 p.m., a figure resembling the husband entered the complex's courtyard. Not the diner, not the gas station, but a place he never mentioned. The angle was grainy, but the jacket, the gait, even the watch were unmistakable. That single frame forced the detectives to pause. Here was an undeniable contradiction, one that couldn't be brushed aside or explained away with vague excuses. The husband's carefully constructed timeline now had a glaring hole. The perfect alibi, they realized, was anything but perfect. As they prepared to bring him back in for a second interview, the room's tension thickened. What was he really hiding? And why had he risked so many small lies for a story that now seemed so fragile? The next conversation would be critical, the moment where truth would have to break through the cracks. The breakthrough came not from a complex forensic breakthrough or a dramatic confession, but from something surprisingly mundane, a simple timestamp on a forgotten digital receipt. Investigators had been combing through the husband's day, trying to piece together the exact sequence of events he insisted had unfolded flawlessly. The timeline he gave was detailed, almost rehearsed, but when they cross-checked his story against objective data, inconsistencies began to emerge. The key was a receipt from a nearby coffee shop, time-stamped exactly 15 minutes after he claimed to have left the house. At first, this might not seem significant. People often stop for coffee, adjust their plans last minute. But the problem was where the coffee shop was located, on the opposite side of town, and the husband's claimed whereabouts made it impossible for him to have been there at that time. More importantly, his car's GPS data, which he had overlooked, confirmed the vehicle had been stationary at home during those minutes. The only way for both to be true was if he had somehow been in two places at once. What made the mistake so glaring was how trivial it was. The husband had explained his day down to the minute, boasting about his efficient routine and his ability to juggle errands expertly. He had emphasized leaving the house at exactly 8:30 a.m., driving directly to the office, and never straying from that path. But the coffee shop receipt was time-stamped at 8:45 a.m., and the shop was simply nowhere near the route he claimed to have taken. The investigators realized he must have sent someone else to the coffee shop, or worse, fabricated the receipt entirely. But the receipt was authentic, verified by the shop's digital system. Digging deeper, the detectives uncovered the root of the problem. The husband's phone clock had been set to the wrong time zone. While he insisted he adjusted all his devices to local time after a recent business trip, this particular phone had been left an hour ahead. That meant every timestamp he referenced during his interviews was effectively shifted, distorting his timeline by a full hour. He'd been basing his alibi on a clock that didn't match the real-world time, and that discrepancy unraveled everything. The simplest oversight, failing to sync a phone's clock, had undermined his entire narrative. It was a mistake so small, so mundane, that it felt almost absurd. How could someone so meticulous overlook something as basic as a phone's time setting? Yet in doing so, he had created a timeline that mathematically could not exist. His claimed movements contradicted the physical evidence. The GPS data, the coffee shop receipt, the security footage from his neighborhood. The timeline collapse was undeniable. When the detectives pressed him on this discrepancy, the change was immediate. His confident demeanor faltered. The smooth rhythm of his story fractured, revealing uneven pauses and hesitant answers. It was as if the foundation of his carefully constructed alibi had been pulled out from beneath him, exposing the gaps he had tried so hard to conceal. The man who once seemed composed now appeared visibly unsettled, caught off guard by a mistake so silly, yet so conclusively damning. The investigators watched closely as he shifted in his seat, avoiding direct eye contact, his voice losing its earlier conviction. The room seemed to shrink with the weight of the error, one that no amount of charm or evasion could explain away. The simplest detail, overlooked in the rush of his deception, had cracked the perfect crime wide open. But even as his facade began to crumble, the question lingered. Why had he risked such an obvious slip? What was he trying to hide that made this silly mistake so costly? The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with unspoken truths. And as the detectives prepared to dive deeper, they sensed the real story was only just beginning to unfold. The room was quiet except for the distant hum of the overhead fluorescent light. Detective Harris sat back, fingers loosely interlaced on the table, eyes steady on the man across from him. Detective Morales leaned forward just slightly, resting her forearm on the edge of the table, her gaze calm but unyielding. "Let's go over this again," Harris said evenly. "You said you were at the grocery store around 4:15. Your phone pinged off the store's Wi-Fi at 4:12. Yet, the security footage shows you walking into the building at 4:45. He slid a still image across the table. A grainy but unmistakable figure, the man's profile unmistakable, entering the store 30 minutes after the supposed time. "How do you explain that?" The man blinked, hands tightening briefly before relaxing again. I was at the store twice," he said quickly. "I came in around 4:10, grabbed a few things, left, then had to go back for something else I forgot." Morales nodded slowly, making a note on her pad. "Okay, that would mean you left the store between 4:12 and 4:45. We checked the parking lot cameras. No sign of you outside during that window. Maybe I went inside a different entrance," he offered, voice a bit higher. "Or maybe I stepped out to take a call and came right back." Harris shook his head, voice low but firm. The cameras cover the entire perimeter. There's no footage of you outside at all during that time. And your phone didn't move from inside the store's Wi-Fi. The man swallowed, gaze flicking away for the briefest moment. Look, I might have mixed up the times. It's been a hectic day. He ran a hand through his hair, the movement a little too deliberate. I was there, just not exactly when you're saying. Morales's pen paused mid-note. You said you were at home between 3:30 and 4 o'clock, correct? Yes, my wife was there too. We spoke with her. She said you left the house just after 3:45. The man's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Maybe she's wrong. It's possible. Harris leaned in slightly. We also have your credit card transaction at the coffee shop at 3:50. He exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. Okay, maybe I left a bit earlier. His eyes darted toward the door, then back. But none of this changes anything. Morales exchanged a glance with Harris, then pulled out a small evidence bag, setting it in front of the man. Inside was a set of keys, one of them marked with a distinctive red tag. These were found near the scene. Your keys. The man's hand twitched but didn't reach for them. I lost those weeks ago, he said, voice flat. Someone could have picked them up. Harris's expression didn't change. If someone else had your keys, wouldn't you have reported them missing? The man's eyes flickered. I didn't want to cause a fuss. Yet here we are, Morales said softly. With you unable to explain why you were so far off on your timeline, why your story keeps shifting, and why your keys show up where they shouldn't. A silence stretched, thick and expectant. Just then, Harris's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then looked up. We just received a new clip from a nearby security camera. You might want to watch this. The screen on the wall flickered to life. The grainy footage showed the man's car pulling into the parking lot at 4:25, long after his claimed return from the store. The timestamp was clear. The man's face paled, lips pressed tight. His eyes met Harris's for a moment. No words, only the quiet unraveling of a carefully maintained truth. The husband's carefully crafted alibi, once thought unbreakable, crumbled because of one seemingly minor oversight. A single security camera timestamp that contradicted his story. He had meticulously planned every step, confident that no one would doubt his account of the day. But the grainy footage, captured innocuously by a camera he never knew existed, showed him arriving home much later than he claimed. That small timestamp wasn't just a number. It was the critical detail that exposed the gap in his story, unraveling the illusion of his perfect plan. Investigators seized on this discrepancy immediately. The timestamp's credibility was verified by cross-referencing other security systems in the area, which confirmed the exact time of his arrival. Moreover, digital records from his phone, GPS data from his car, and witness statements all aligned with the footage, painting a consistent picture that directly contradicted his version of events. The husband's failure to account for this one small detail revealed not only his presence at the scene during the crucial window but also suggested deliberate deception. Forensic experts further strengthened the case by analyzing evidence found at the crime scene. Traces of materials linked to the husband's vehicle and minor fibers matching his clothing. Each piece, insignificant in isolation, combined to form a compelling narrative. The prosecution's case solidified quickly, and within days, the husband was officially arrested and charged with obstruction of justice and suspicion of involvement in the crime. The investigation moved forward toward trial, where the weight of these small but decisive details promised to be central in securing a conviction. What this case underscores is a timeless truth in criminal investigations. No matter how precise or calculated a plan may be, it is vulnerable to collapse through overlooked details. Small inconsistencies, whether a timestamp, a misplaced fiber, or a contradictory statement, speak louder than the grand design of a scheme. The hubris of believing a crime can be perfect blinds perpetrators to the reality that the smallest slip-up can unravel everything. It reminds us that in the pursuit of truth, the devil is always in the details. If you found this story compelling and want to see more cases where tiny details bring so-called perfect crimes crashing down, make sure to subscribe to our channel. We dive deep into the moments where meticulous plans fail, and justice is served because no secret remains hidden forever. Also, drop a comment below with the phrase "Detail wins again" if you made it to the end. Let us know you stayed sharp through every twist and turn. Your support helps us bring more gripping cases to light, proving that in the world of crime, no detail is too small to matter.